Get out. We have new owners now. That's what my son told me, standing in the doorway of the house I paid for. He said I was confused, unstable, unfit to live alone. That was 10 years ago. Now he's the one losing everything, and I'm the one holding the truth. This is my story of betrayal, justice, and the price of love. If you're watching, please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. I wake up early most mornings, even though there isn't much reason to. Old habits don't fade easily. I've been retired for 8 years now, but I still get up before the sun, make my coffee, and walk around this old house like I used to when life was full of noise and people. The light comes through the window, soft and pale, catching the dust in the air. I don't bother cleaning it much anymore. It's just me here, and after a while, you learn not to chase every speck of dust. The house is small, but it feels bigger now that it's empty. The walls used to hold voices, laughter, sometimes arguments, the sound of the television from the living room, or the smell of food on the stove. Now, there's only the hum of the refrigerator and the floor creaking when I move. It's quiet. Too quiet sometimes. I used to be a literature teacher at the high school a few blocks away. 35 years of correcting essays, reading papers, and trying to get teenagers to care about poetry. I loved it, though. Teaching gave me purpose. I still have some of those notebooks on the kitchen table. My handwriting is neat, the same way I used to insist my students write their essays. Sometimes I flip through them just to remember what it felt like to be needed. There's a clock hanging in the hallway that hasn't worked in years. I could replace it, but I don't. It still ticks, but the hands don't move, and for some reason I like it that way. It reminds me that time doesn't stop just because I want it to. On the mantel above the fireplace, there's a picture of my son, Andrew. He was 16 when that picture was taken. He's smiling, holding a medal he won at a school competition. I remember how proud he was, how proud I was. He had so much energy, so much ambition. I thought he'd conquer the world one day. I didn't know the world would change him before I could understand what was happening. Andrew was a bright kid, always the one with the answers, always curious, always questioning everything. I used to think that was a good thing. Maybe I still do, but sometimes I wonder if I pushed him too hard to be perfect. We were close once, closer than most mothers and sons I knew. He used to tell me everything. Then one day he stopped. I still don't know when it really happened. Maybe it's not one moment, but a slow drift that you don't notice until it's too late. I remember one night when he was little, maybe 10 years old. There was a storm, and the thunder scared him. He ran into my room crying, holding his blanket. I told him he could stay, and I read to him until he fell asleep. It was a poem by Robert Frost, one of his favorites from the classroom. He liked the sound of the words, not because he understood them, but because I did. He used to say, "You make poems sound like bedtime stories, Mom." That memory still makes me smile. It's one of the few that hasn't turned sour. Now, when it rains, I sometimes read that same poem again, out loud, to no one. I still keep the book by my bed. It makes the silence easier to live with. The hardest part about being alone isn't the quiet. It's the way the quiet reminds you of what used to fill it. I see that picture of Andrew every day, and I can't stop wondering how we got here. I gave him everything I could, my time, my energy, my love, and somehow that became the reason he pulled away. I used to think he was angry because I worked too much, that maybe he felt I cared more about my students than about him. But deep down, I think it's more complicated than that. Maybe he just needed someone to blame. I still talk to him sometimes, out loud. Just little things. I'll say, "Andrew, you'd laugh if you saw how bad I've gotten at cooking." Or, "You remember this song, don't you?" It makes me feel like he's still somewhere near, even if it's only in my mind. I take his picture off the mantel every now and then and clean the glass. His smile hasn't changed. Mine has. I look at that photo and wonder if he remembers the mother who read him poems and walked him to school in the rain, or if he's replaced her with someone else, someone colder, someone he can blame without feeling guilty. People say time heals everything. I don't think that's true. Time just teaches you how to live with the ache. You learn to carry it better, that's all. Sometimes I tell myself he'll call. Other times I tell myself it doesn't matter. But when the nights get quiet and the air feels heavy, I know the truth. I miss him. I miss my son. I used to think I lost him somewhere along the way. But now I realize I didn't lose him. He just rewrote the story and left me out. It started like any other winter morning. The kind of morning when the sky looks too heavy to hold itself up and the cold air comes through every little crack in the windows. Boston winters are long, and when you live alone, they feel even longer. I had the radio on low, playing that soft classical station I always keep on for company. The announcer was talking about snowfall records, while my coffee was already cold on the table. That's when I heard the knock on the door. It was the mail carrier, bundled up to his ears. He handed me a large envelope, thick and official-looking, with a return address from Manhattan. I didn't know anyone in Manhattan, not anymore. My heart gave a small jump. For a moment I thought maybe it was some sort of mistake. I sat down at the table and looked at it for a long while before opening it. The house was so quiet that I could hear the paper tear when I finally slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a letter from a law firm, full of words I had to read twice to understand. One of my former students, Harold Levine, had passed away. He had left me something in his will. I had to stop reading for a moment. Harold Levine. I hadn't heard that name in decades. He was 17 when I last saw him. A bright kid from a hard background. His mother cleaned houses and his father wasn't around much. He used to fall asleep in class because he worked nights at a grocery store to help his mom with rent. The school board wanted to expel him after he was caught cheating on a test. I still remember sitting in that meeting, looking at the board members and saying, every child deserves at least one chance to write a better sentence for himself. They thought I was being sentimental, but I knew that boy just needed someone to believe he wasn't finished yet. The letter said Harold had gone on to become a businessman, very successful, with no family left. And somehow, after all these years, he remembered me. He had left me $50 million and an apartment in Manhattan. I read that part 3 times. $50 million. It didn't seem real. I even looked for another name on the papers, thinking maybe it was meant for someone else. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the letter down. I looked around my kitchen, the old table, the chipped mug, the worn linoleum, and it felt almost wrong, like this kind of news didn't belong in a place like mine. The radio kept playing softly, some piano piece I didn't recognize. Outside, the snow was falling hard now, covering everything in white. I thought about Harold, that skinny boy with tired eyes, and I whispered, "You didn't owe me anything, sweetheart." No one is ever rich enough to give back the years they were given. That thought stayed with me. Money couldn't change what had already been lived, but maybe it could do some good for someone else. Around mid-morning, my neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, came by. She's a retired judge, sharp as ever, always watching the neighborhood like it's her courtroom. I must have looked pale because she raised an eyebrow as soon as she saw me. "Claire, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Maybe I have," I told her, handing her the letter. She read it twice, slower each time. When she finished, she set her glasses down and said, "Well, if you accept this, you'll make headlines. If you refuse it, you'll become a legend." We both laughed, but my laugh was nervous. She poured herself a cup of my cold coffee, the way she always does, and said, "Whatever you decide, make sure it's something you can sleep with." That afternoon after she left, I sat at the table again and thought about what to do. $50 million. I didn't need that kind of money. I didn't even want it. But I could use it for something good. I thought about the kids who came through my classroom over the years. The ones like Harold, the ones who never had a fair chance. By evening, I had made up my mind. I would create a scholarship in Harold's name, the Harold Levine Foundation. That way, his gift would keep helping the kind of student he used to be. For a while, I felt calm, like something meaningful had been decided. But calm never lasts long around here. The next morning, my name was on the news. They didn't use the full name, just anonymous Boston teacher inherits $50 million from former student. But in a neighborhood like mine, it doesn't take much for people to put 2 and 2 together. My phone started ringing almost right away. At first it was reporters, then people I hadn't spoken to in years. I let it ring. And then I saw a name I hadn't seen in 10 years. Andrew. The sound of that ringtone cut through the house like it used to cut through bedtime when he was a boy. 10 years of silence. And now, the voice I once sang lullabies to was calling me again. I didn't answer. Not yet. I just sat there, staring at his name on the screen, feeling the years fold in on themselves. And all I could think was, after everything, he still knows my number. Mrs. Caldwell has lived across the street from me for almost 20 years. She's 72, a widow, and probably the sharpest woman I've ever met. She used to be a judge, the kind who never raised her voice but somehow made everyone in the room listen. Even now when she speaks, you find yourself sitting a little straighter. We met years ago at a neighborhood meeting about snow shoveling rules. Everyone else was arguing about parking spaces, but she and I ended up talking about books. Since then, we've had coffee together at least twice a week. She's one of the few people I can sit with without feeling like I have to fill the silence. That morning, after the letter and the phone call from Andrew, she came over without being asked. She always seems to know when something's going on. I was still in my robe. The news had already broken about the inheritance, and there were reporters parked down the street. Mrs. Caldwell walked right in, brushed the snow off her coat, and said, "So it's true." I poured us both coffee. She doesn't take sugar, never has. She likes things as they are, coffee black, opinions firm, truth plain. We sat at the table for a while, neither of us saying much. The house was too quiet, and outside the snow kept falling in thick, heavy flakes. Finally, she said, "You look calmer than I expected." "I'm not sure it's real yet," I told her. "It's real," she said. "The question is, what are you going to do with it?" I didn't have an answer. I told her I planned to use the money to start a scholarship fund in Harold's name. Something good. Something that might make sense of it all. She nodded slowly, stirring her coffee even though she hadn't put anything in it. "That's noble. But be careful. Money has a way of changing the temperature of a room before you even notice." I smiled a little. "You sound like you've seen it happen." "I have," she said. "More times than I can count. People think justice is blind, but I've seen it look the other way for a price." We sat quiet again for a bit. Then I asked her something that had been sitting in my mind since the night before. "Did you ever believe in justice when you were still working?" She took a long time to answer. That's her way. She doesn't rush words. Finally, she said, "No, I never believed in justice itself. I believed in people, the ones brave enough to go looking for it. That's the only kind that ever mattered." I looked at her then, really looked. She was older now, her hands spotted and thin, but her eyes still had that same steady light, the kind that could see through excuses. "Then what do I do?" I asked. She sighed, set down her cup and leaned back. "You do what keeps you honest. You take care of yourself, and you keep that letter quiet. The world smells money faster than it smells bread in an oven. Keep this between us until you've decided exactly how public you want to be." I promised her I would, though deep down I already knew it was too late. News travels faster than promises. Later that afternoon, the phone rang again and again. I stopped answering. At one point, I looked out the window and saw two reporters standing by the mailbox, one of them holding a camera, stamping his feet against the cold. A van was parked across the street, idling. I could see the breath of the driver through the windshield. Mrs. Caldwell called from her house around 5. "You all right over there?" "I'm fine," I said, though my voice didn't sound like it. "You keep those doors locked," she told me, "and don't talk to anyone unless you want your face on the evening news." By nightfall, the snow had turned into a mix of ice and slush. The headlights from passing cars threw strange shadows through the curtains. I turned off the radio, sat down with a book, and tried to pretend the world outside wasn't waiting to get in. But then, through the half-open curtain, I saw something that made my stomach twist. A figure standing across the street, half hidden near the lamppost. A man, tall, still, not moving. At first I thought it was one of the reporters, but there was something familiar about the way he stood. Shoulders tense, hands in his pockets, like he was fighting with himself about being there. Even from that distance I knew, a mother always knows. It was Andrew. He didn't come closer. He didn't knock. He just stood there in the snow for a while, looking at the house. Then he turned and walked away. I stood by the window long after he was gone, my hand resting on the curtain, my heart beating harder than it had in years. 10 years of silence, and now he was out there again. Not as the boy who once needed me, but as a man I barely recognized. And the thought that wouldn't leave me was this: my son had come back. But I couldn't tell if he was looking for his mother, or for her money. It was late in the evening when the phone rang again. I almost didn't pick it up. The number wasn't saved, but it had that familiar area code from Seattle. For a moment I thought maybe it was a reporter again, or one of those people asking questions about the inheritance. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me, maybe that small, foolish part of a mother that never dies, told me to answer. When I said hello, there was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years said, "Hi, Mom, it's me. Andrew?" For a second I couldn't breathe. My hands went cold, my throat tight. The sound of his voice was warm, polite, steady, but it didn't sound like my son. It was softer, practiced, like the way people talk when they want something but are afraid to ask too soon. "Mom, I've been thinking about you," he said. "I miss you. We've been apart for too long." I didn't answer. I couldn't. There were 1,000 things I wanted to say, 1,000 things I'd said to myself in the dark, but none of them came out. He kept talking, filling the silence with gentle phrases that didn't feel real. Words like miss, regret, family, words that used to mean something. In my dreams, I had imagined this moment so many times. The call, the apology, the sound of my son finally saying he was sorry. But in those dreams, his voice didn't have that edge of calculation. It didn't sound rehearsed the way his voice did now. I finally managed to say his name. "Andrew." He sounded relieved just to hear it. "Yeah, Mom, it's me." There was a pause, that kind of pause where the air itself feels heavy. Then he said, "I heard about what happened, about the inheritance. That's incredible. You deserve it." The words landed like stones. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask about my life or my health or the years we'd lost. The first thing he brought up was the money. Still, I kept my tone calm. "It was unexpected," I said. "He was one of my students a long time ago." He made a small sound, a thoughtful hum, the kind people make when they're pretending to understand. "I always knew you made an impact," he said. "You've always had that way of changing people's lives." He said it like a compliment, but it didn't reach me. I could hear him smiling through the phone, that professional, practiced smile of someone used to negotiating. We talked for a few minutes, though it wasn't really talking. It was two people standing on opposite sides of a bridge that no longer existed, both pretending it was still there. He asked about my health, about the house, about Boston winters. I gave short answers. I couldn't trust myself to say more. At one point, he said, "I'd like to see you, Mom. Maybe we could have lunch soon, talk things through." I didn't respond right away. I just stared out the window. The snow was still piled on the street from the week before. Across the road, Mrs. Caldwell's house was dark, her curtains drawn. I wanted to ask her what to do, but she wasn't there. Instead, I just said, "Maybe." After we hung up, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the phone. My coffee had gone cold again. I picked up a pen and a piece of paper and started to write a letter. At first, I wrote everything I wanted to tell him. How much I'd missed him, how I'd spent birthdays alone, how I still kept his childhood things in a box in the closet. I wrote that I never stopped loving him, even when it felt like he'd stopped being my son. But the longer I wrote, the angrier I became. The words started to twist. I crossed out sentences, tore the page, started again. I wrote that I forgave him, then I crossed that out too, because it wasn't true. By the third draft, I realized I wasn't writing to him anymore. I was writing to myself, trying to make sense of the space between us, trying to fill 10 years of silence with something that made sense. Eventually, I gave up. I tore the paper into small pieces, dropped them into the trash, and turned off the light. The next morning, Mrs. Caldwell came by. She never waits for an invitation. She must have seen my face because she didn't even ask what was wrong. She just sat down and said, "He called, didn't he?" I nodded. "Last night." She sighed. "And," I hesitated, "he wants to see me." Caldwell stirred her coffee, then looked at me with that sharp, knowing expression of hers. "Claire, your son's a lawyer. That means every sentence he says comes with a condition you can't see. Be careful. The moment you start talking about money, you're not his mother anymore. You're a party to a negotiation." I wanted to be angry, but she was right. Caldwell is almost never wrong about people. "I just want to see him," I said quietly. "One time. I need to look him in the eye." She nodded slowly. "Then go, but go for the truth, not for comfort. Sometimes you can't have both." That night I sat down again with my phone and typed out a message. My hands shook a little as I wrote. "All right, let's meet. In New York. One time." I read it 3 times before sending it. After that, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. I wasn't going to New York to fix anything. I wasn't going there to pretend we could start over. I just needed to see how far apart we'd really grown. To measure the distance between the boy I raised and the man who called me after 10 years of silence. New York was colder than I remembered, the kind of cold that cuts through gloves and makes your bones ache. I hadn't been there in years, not since a school field trip when I was still teaching. Back then, the city had felt alive, exciting, full of possibility. This time, it just felt loud and foreign. I got to the restaurant early. It was one of those places with gold handles on the doors, soft lighting, and piano music playing low enough to make you lean forward to hear it. The carpet was thick, the kind that swallows footsteps. I sat at a table near the window where I could see the street below, lights flickering off the snow that was starting to fall again. The waiter brought me water. My hands shook a little when I picked up the glass. I kept wondering what Andrew would look like now, what kind of man he had become. I tried to remember the last time I'd seen him in person. 10 years felt like another lifetime. When he finally walked in, I knew him right away. He was taller, maybe leaner, but still had that same confident walk. He was wearing a gray suit that looked expensive, the kind that fits too perfectly to be bought off a rack. His hair was neatly combed back, not a strand out of place. He looked every bit the successful lawyer he had always wanted to be. Beside him was his wife, Lauren. I had seen her picture online once in an article about charity events. In person, she was even more polished. Her coat was white wool, her jewelry simple but clearly expensive. Her smile looked polite but didn't reach her eyes. And then there was Eli, 13 years old, quiet, holding a small digital camera in his hands. His eyes reminded me so much of Andrew's when he was a boy that my chest tightened just looking at him. They spotted me at once. Andrew smiled, that practiced smile I remembered from the phone call. "Mom," he said, walking over. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, but it was quick, almost formal. "You look great. It's been too long." Lauren echoed him, saying how nice it was to finally meet. Eli stood slightly behind them, unsure of where to look. I smiled at him and said softly, "Hello, Eli." He nodded. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson." I told him he could call me Grandma if he wanted. He smiled politely but didn't answer. We sat down. The waiter poured wine, and I tried not to stare at the way Andrew ordered so smoothly, like someone used to being in charge. The restaurant was quiet except for the soft piano in the corner and the sound of dishes being carried out from the kitchen. The conversation started the way these things usually do. Small talk, polite questions, the kind of words you use to fill air that's too heavy to breathe. Lauren talked about their house in Seattle, about Eli's private school, about vacations to Europe. She spoke quickly, like someone used to being listened to. Andrew nodded along, occasionally adding something about work or the people they knew. I listened, smiled when it felt appropriate, but there was a distance between us that words couldn't cover. The only time Andrew mentioned me was when the waiter asked if we were celebrating something. He laughed lightly and said, "Just a small family reunion. It's been a while since I've seen my mom." His tone was cheerful, but I could hear the emptiness under it. At one point, I asked him what kind of law he practiced now. He didn't hesitate. "Corporate," he said. "I'm with Finch and Maddox. We handle international investments, large clients, mostly financial institutions, and overseas partners." He said it like it was supposed to impress me. I nodded, though I didn't really know what to say. "That sounds like a lot of responsibility." "It is," he said, smiling. "But it pays well, and I like the challenge." Lauren put her hand on his arm and said, "He's always been ambitious. I keep telling him he should slow down, but he doesn't listen." They laughed together, and I just watched. They looked like a couple out of a magazine, neat, successful, rehearsed. But there was something cold there, too, a kind of distance I could feel even across the table. When the food came, I tried to talk with Eli. He was quiet but polite. I asked him what he liked at school. He said he liked science, especially astronomy. He told me he wanted to take pictures of the stars one day. I asked about his camera, and his eyes lit up. "It was a birthday gift," he said. "I take pictures of everything, even when people don't notice." Before I could say more, Andrew interrupted, talking about how Eli had recently won a small photography contest. He went on for several minutes about the importance of discipline and focus, like he was giving a presentation. I saw Eli shrink a little in his chair, his eyes drifting toward the window. It reminded me of Andrew at that same age, the way his father used to talk over him, how he would look down and go quiet. When the plates were cleared, Lauren leaned forward and asked about Boston, about my house, about the inheritance. Her questions were polite but pointed. I could tell she was curious, maybe more than curious. I gave short answers, careful ones. I said the same thing I told everyone else, that it was an old student's gift, something unexpected. She smiled and said, "That must be such a blessing, especially at your age." I smiled back but didn't answer. The bill came. Andrew reached for his wallet, then patted his pockets. "Oh, I think I left it in my other jacket," he said lightly. It was the kind of excuse you make when you want someone else to pay, but still sound casual. I didn't say anything. I just took out my card and handed it to the waiter. Old habits die hard. Outside, the snow was falling again. We stood under the awning while Andrew and Lauren talked about getting a cab. The city lights reflected in the puddles, gold and red. Eli was standing beside me, his camera hanging around his neck. He looked up at me and whispered, "I know what Dad said about you isn't true." I froze. What did he say? He looked down at his shoes. "He told me you were sick, that you couldn't remember things, that you weren't, well." I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight again, the way it had on the phone. I managed to touch his shoulder lightly. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded, looked at me for a moment longer, then walked back toward his parents. I stood there watching them get into a cab, my reflection caught in the glass door behind me. I didn't see the woman who'd raised a son. I saw someone he'd rewritten. Back at the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my notebook. I wrote down one line and stared at it for a long time. Is forgiveness just another word for foolishness? I closed the book, turned off the light, and sat in the dark for a while. When I finally lay down, I kept seeing Eli's eyes. Quiet, thoughtful, full of something familiar. The same light I used to see in his father's eyes when he was young. Only now, that light was dimming, like it was running out of places to shine. A few days after I came back from New York, Mrs. Caldwell showed up at my door again. She didn't call first. She never does when something is serious. It was early evening, already dark outside, the kind of cold that makes every sound sharper. I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea when I saw her crossing the street, her scarf blowing behind her like a flag. When I opened the door, she was holding a folder in her hands, thick, worn, tied with a rubber band. She looked at me the way she used to look at witnesses in her courtroom. Serious, steady. "We need to talk," she said. We sat at the table. She didn't touch her tea this time. She just placed the folder in front of me. I could tell by the way she slid it across the table that it wasn't good news. "I found this," she said. "An old court file. I wasn't looking for it, but a friend from my old firm called me. He remembered your name. I thought you should see it before someone else does." I hesitated. I didn't want to touch it. "What is it?" She looked at me gently, but she didn't soften her voice. "It's about your son, a legal motion he filed years ago." I opened the folder slowly. Inside were several documents, stamped, dated, signed. My name was on the top of each page. The first line I read made my stomach twist. Petition for declaration of incapacity. I kept reading, not really believing what I saw. It said that 10 years ago, Andrew had filed a petition claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. The document stated I suffered from age-related confusion and diminished cognitive ability. It even listed the old house, my house, as an asset requiring protection and transfer. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My fingers went cold. I flipped to the last page, and that's when I saw it. My signature. Or at least something that looked like it. It wasn't mine. I knew my handwriting. 35 years of grading essays had trained my hand to be steady. This signature was close, but not mine. The letters were slightly off, the loops tighter, the pen pressure too light. I looked at Caldwell. "He signed it," I said quietly. "He signed my name." She nodded once. "Yes, and it was filed and processed quickly. No one questioned it. The case was closed within months." I put my hand to my chest. "He took the house? The record shows he sold it a year later," she said softly. I sat there staring at the papers, unable to move. It felt like the air had been pulled out of the room. I thought about all those years I blamed myself for working too much, for not being there enough, for pushing too hard. And now I realized the truth was worse than anything I had imagined. Caldwell watched me quietly, then said, "I wish I could tell you this was rare, but I've seen it before." She leaned back in her chair, looking tired for the first time since I'd known her. "When my husband died, she said, my daughter wanted control of my estate. She told people I was forgetful, that I couldn't handle my finances. She hired a lawyer behind my back. I found out before it went too far, but I saw the paperwork. I know what it feels like to see your own child turn you into a case file." Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did slightly as she took a sip of tea. "I didn't know that," I said quietly. She gave a small, sad smile. Most people don't. We don't talk about those kinds of betrayals. There's too much shame in them. But I learned something then, Claire. A mother's love can survive almost anything, but it shouldn't survive the loss of her dignity. There's a line, even in love. That line is called self-respect. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. The clock on the wall ticked faintly, the same clock that hadn't moved in years. The sound filled the silence between us. I looked back down at the file. I kept seeing his name beside mine, Andrew Thompson, petitioner. Every page was proof that my son hadn't just left me. He had erased me on paper. I thought about the night of the storm when he was 10 years old, running into my room scared of the thunder. I thought about how I told him he was safe, that I would always protect him. Now I was the one who needed protecting. Caldwell reached across the table and touched my hand. "You can fight this," she said. "You have the right to reopen the case, to clear your name legally. I can help you find someone discreet." I nodded, but I didn't really hear her. My mind was somewhere else, replaying every moment of that dinner in New York. The way he smiled, the way he talked about his job, the way his wife asked careful questions. It all made sense now. He wasn't reconnecting. He was preparing. That night, after Caldwell left, I sat in the living room without turning on the light. The folder was still on the table, open to the page, with my forged signature. The house felt colder than usual, as if it, too, knew what I had just learned. I could hear the faint ticking of the old clock, steady and empty. Each sound felt like a reminder of time lost, of trust broken, of love that had turned into something unrecognizable. I whispered to no one. I raised a lawyer, but I never thought I'd have to hire one to defend myself against my own child. The clock kept ticking, and I sat there in the dark, wondering when being a mother had stopped meaning safety and started meaning survival. A few weeks passed after Caldwell showed me the court papers. I stopped answering most calls. I didn't have the energy to explain to anyone what was happening, and I didn't want pity. Then one morning, while checking my email, I saw a name that made me smile for the first time in days. It was from Eli. At first, his messages were simple. He sent pictures he'd taken around Seattle, city streets after rain, a park bench covered in leaves, a stray dog sleeping in front of a bakery. The photos were good, really good. He had an eye for small things people usually walk past. Every few days, another email came, each one with a few photos and a short note like, "Do you like this one?" or "This is my favorite light." I always wrote back. I told him I loved them, that he saw the world the way an artist does. I didn't ask where his parents thought those emails were going. I just wanted to keep that small connection alive. One evening there was another message from him, but this one had a video file attached. It was titled simply Dad. My stomach tightened before I even clicked it. The clip was short, maybe 40 seconds. It looked like someone had filmed it from a distance, maybe through a hallway at some event. I saw Andrew standing in front of a reporter. His face was calm, professional. I could hear his voice clearly, that same careful tone he always used when he wanted to sound sincere. He was saying, "My mother isn't well. She's confused most of the time, poor thing. I'm just trying to protect our family's reputation and handle her affairs responsibly." He smiled when he said it. That polite, empty smile. Then the clip ended. For a long moment I couldn't move. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the laptop. I played it again, hoping I'd misheard, hoping it would sound different the second time. It didn't. I thought about deleting it right then. My finger hovered over the key. I didn't want to see it, didn't want to know that he could lie that easily in public. But before I could decide, another email from Eli appeared. It said, "Grandma, you once told me that photos are light, little pieces of truth that stay even when people lie. I'm just giving the light back to you." I stared at the words until they blurred. My throat burned. I put the laptop down and covered my face with my hands. That night I sat in the living room without turning on a lamp. The only light came from the computer screen, replaying that video over and over. The glow lit the room in flashes. His face, my reflection, his words. I don't remember when the tears started, but they didn't stop for a long time. The next morning I called Caldwell. She came right over, still wearing her coat and gloves, and I showed her the clip. She didn't say anything at first, she just watched. When it ended, she took off her glasses, wiped them with the edge of her scarf, and looked at me. "Well," she said, quietly, "if that isn't divine irony." I frowned. He's lying about me, Eleanor. To strangers. On camera. She nodded. Yes. But you should also see what you have, Claire. Most people spend their lives trying to prove a lie. You have proof handed to you by a child. I didn't answer. I just felt tired. Bone-deep tired. Caldwell kept talking, her voice steady, that courtroom calm still there. If you ever need to defend yourself, or if this thing with the inheritance goes where I think it's going, that video is a gift. It's a confession he doesn't even realize he's made. If used at the right time, it could be the kind of evidence heaven itself signs off on. She patted my hand. But don't use it yet. Keep it safe. Wait until the right moment. After she left, I sat at the table for a long while, staring at the folder she'd given me before and now the laptop beside it. 2 sets of truths, one written, one spoken, both showing me the same thing. I had raised a man who could stand in front of the world and call his mother unfit, and do it with a smile. The rest of that day passed quietly. I didn't answer emails or calls. I made soup I didn't eat. Every so often I'd open Eli's message again and reread his line about the light. It was strange how something so small could mean so much. Before going to bed, I wrote him back, "Thank you for the light, Eli. Keep taking pictures. The world needs people who see clearly." I didn't tell him what the video meant or how it felt. That wasn't his burden. He was just a boy trying to make sense of adults who lied too easily. Later that night, I sat in the dark again, the laptop still open beside me. The old clock on the wall ticked softly, even though it didn't keep time. The only real movement was the light from the screen, washing over my face every time the video replayed. I thought about the years I spent teaching my students to love words, to respect them, to use them carefully because words can heal or destroy. And I realized my own son had mastered them for all the wrong reasons. He'd learned how to twist them until truth sounded like concern, and cruelty sounded like protection. I whispered to myself, not sure if I was angry or just broken. I taught him to love words, and now he's using them to kill the truth. Mrs. Caldwell called me the week before the gala without any fanfare, like it was the most natural thing in the world for her to arrange. She did not ask if I wanted to go. She told me she had a ticket and to pack a black dress. That was Mrs. Caldwell, direct, decisive, and a little bossy when she knew something mattered. I tried to tell her it wasn't necessary, that I didn't belong at events like that, but she simply said, "You belong wherever the truth is needed." That was the end of the argument. I remember standing in front of the small mirror in my bedroom that evening, holding the envelope Harold had left me. It was folded neatly, the paper worn at the edges where I'd opened and closed it more than once. I read the line he had written in his last note. "Justice isn't blind. It just waits for courage." I read it aloud to the empty room because saying it once made it feel more real. I put on the black dress I still had in the back of the closet, the one I only wore for funerals and weddings, and I threaded the old pearl necklace, the only piece of jewelry that felt like mine. The pearls had a small chip on one side. I had broken one the night Andrew left and somehow never replaced it. I brushed my hair, not trying to hide the gray so much as to make myself presentable for whatever I needed to do. Mrs. Caldwell arrived at my door in a hat and a long coat, looking like she had stepped out of a newspaper photograph. She took one look at me and said, "You look ready." We left in her car, and I kept thinking about how strange it felt to be driven to a place where my son would be honored, where the people who applauded him might never know what he had done. The event hall was grand. High ceilings, chandeliers, people in suits and gowns, waiters moving quietly with trays of champagne. Cameras flashed at the edges of the room like small, impatient birds. I'd seen gala pictures before, but being there was different. Louder, brighter, full of a kind of energy I wasn't used to anymore. Reporters stood near the entrance, microphones ready, smiling faces rehearsed. It felt like stepping into someone else's life. We were led to a table near the front. From there, I could see the stage clearly where they would present the award. I watched people talk, shake hands, and pose for pictures. There were plaques being handed to men and women who were praised for their ethics and leadership, speeches about community and integrity. It was all very proper and polished. When Andrew walked on stage to accept his award, he looked like he belonged there. He stood straight, smiled at the crowd, and when he spoke, his voice was calm and practiced. He talked about responsibility and service, about doing what was right in difficult times. The audience applauded politely. I felt the applause in my chest like a pressure, and I couldn't tell if it was for him or for what he represented on that stage. Between courses, Mrs. Caldwell leaned over and said quietly, "Keep your hands in your lap and your face steady. Don't look for revenge. Let the truth do the work. Her voice was steady, but I could tell she was watching me as much as watching him. At one point during the program, they played a video montage of honorees and their careers. I listened to the words and watched the faces, and my throat tightened. I kept thinking about Harold's note in my pocket and the way he had trusted me enough to leave me this responsibility. Part of me felt small and out of place among all that polish and applause, but another part, the one that had spent 35 years teaching children how to tell the truth in their essays, felt like it had to be there. The room smelled faintly of perfume and lemon polish, the kind of clean smell that's used to hide ordinary things. There were flashes from cameras and quiet laughter, and all around me people were doing what people do at these events, performing civility. I kept my hands folded and tried to breathe through it. Caldwell reached over once and squeezed my hand. "When the moment comes, breathe," she said. "You won't need to make a sound. The right piece of truth says more than 100 speeches." I nodded because she had always been right, and because I trusted her judgment more than my own nerves that night. I watched him as he moved through the crowd afterward, shaking hands and taking pictures, smiling with that same practiced calm. He looked at me now and then, as people do when they see someone they owe a nod to. When he passed by our table, he stopped, waved, and mouthed a quick, "Thanks, Mom," as if that small phrase could hold the weight of everything left unsaid. It felt hollow in the same place where his voice had always been warm. On the way home in Caldwell's car, we drove past the city lights, and I felt like I'd been in a strange theater where nothing behind the curtains had changed. Caldwell didn't say much on the drive back. She let me sit with the noise of the city and the memory of his speech. At my door, she turned and looked straight at me and said, "You did well. You showed up. That's the hardest part." I wanted to tell her I wasn't sure why I had gone, whether it was to catch him in a lie or to see if anything of the boy I knew was still there. I couldn't find the words. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything I'd seen and heard. I wasn't sure if I'd gone to confront him or to witness him, or maybe a little of both. I did know one thing clearly. I did not know whether I was on the verge of revenge or on the brink of release. I only knew I needed to be there to see what would happen next. The morning after the gala, I sat at my kitchen table with the laptop open. The light through the window was weak and gray, the kind of light that makes everything look older than it is. I had barely slept. The house was silent except for the sound of the radiator clicking on and off. The video that Eli had sent me, the one that had broken me in half, was still saved on my desktop. Mrs. Caldwell came by again. She didn't waste time with greetings. She sat down, poured herself some coffee, and said, "You have something powerful in your hands, Claire. The question is, what will you do with it?" I didn't answer at first. The truth was, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to delete it, to let the whole thing disappear. But another part of me, the part that had listened to Harold's note and his talk about courage, knew that silence wouldn't fix anything. Caldwell reached into her bag and took out a list of email addresses. "The organizers of the Lawyer of the Year event," she said. "They're putting together a highlight reel, something about ethics and family values. They're asking for clips and messages from families of the honorees." I looked at her and realized what she was suggesting. She didn't say the words, but she didn't have to. I closed the laptop and said quietly, "If I do this, there's no going back." She nodded. That's what justice always means. No going back. It took me the rest of the afternoon to decide. I sent a short message to the event committee attaching the file and wrote, "A personal tribute from his mother." That was all. The night of the gala replay came quickly. I didn't plan to go, but Mrs. Caldwell insisted. "You started this. You should see it through," she said. So I went, wearing the same black dress and pearls. The air in the ballroom felt heavier than before, and every smile looked a little too polished. The program began as it had the first night. Speeches, polite laughter, applause that felt practiced. Waiters moved quietly through the aisles, refilling glasses. The pianist played something soft that no one was really listening to. Then Andrew took the stage. He looked confident, smiling for the cameras, holding his notes in one hand. The announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. "Please welcome this year's recipient, Attorney Andrew Thompson, recognized for his outstanding service and commitment to ethical leadership." The audience clapped, and he stepped up to the microphone. His voice carried easily, calm and certain. "Thank you. I've always believed that family is the foundation of morality," he began. "It teaches us loyalty, honesty, compassion, values that guide everything we do as professionals and as people." I felt my stomach twist. The irony of it almost made me laugh, but I didn't. Caldwell's hand brushed my arm. "Breathe," she whispered. Andrew continued talking about dedication and sacrifice, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "I learned everything from my family," he said. "From my mother, who taught me about integrity and standing by your principles." And then, right there, the screen behind him flickered. At first it looked like part of the planned video montage, photos of families' smiling faces. But then, the sound shifted. My breath caught as the picture changed. It was him, standing with that reporter. His voice came through the speakers, loud, clear, and cruel. "My mother isn't well. She's confused most of the time, poor thing. I'm just trying to protect our family's reputation and handle her affairs responsibly." The ballroom went still. For a second, nobody moved. Then whispers started, soft at first, then louder, the kind of noise that spreads like smoke. People turned in their chairs, looking from the screen to Andrew, then back again. Lauren's face went pale. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Across the room, I caught a glimpse of Eli, standing near the back, beside one of the stage assistants. He looked frozen, his camera hanging at his side, and then I saw something change in his expression, the slow understanding of what he was seeing. On stage, Andrew stood there as if the floor had given way beneath him. The microphone slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a sharp sound that echoed through the hall. The clip ended as abruptly as it had begun. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever heard. For a long moment, nobody said a word. Then the host, trying to recover, stepped forward awkwardly. "Well, it seems we've had a bit of a technical issue," he said, but his voice trembled. Andrew didn't move. He just stared out at the audience, his face pale, his jaw tight. I stood up slowly. Caldwell touched my arm again, but I shook my head. I didn't want to stay. I walked out of the ballroom without looking back. The hallway outside was dim and empty. The sounds from inside the hall faded behind me. Chairs scraping, people whispering, someone calling Andrew's name. I walked through the lobby and out into the cold. The night air hit me hard, but it felt cleaner than anything inside that room. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. I could still hear the echo of his voice in my head. So smooth, so sure, so false. I stood there for a moment, letting the noise fade, the cold biting at my hands. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel powerless. Caldwell came out a few minutes later. She didn't say anything, just stood next to me. We watched the cars pass by, the breath of people on the sidewalks clouding the air. Finally, she said quietly, "You did it." I shook my head. No, the truth did. We stood there in silence a little longer. I thought of Harold's letter again, of what he had written about courage. Maybe this was what he meant. Not loud victories or big speeches, but the quiet act of letting the truth be seen when it needed to be. As we walked away, I looked back one last time at the tall glass doors of the ballroom. Through them, I could still see the lights and the people moving like ghosts behind the glass. I didn't feel revenge. I didn't even feel anger anymore. What I felt was something quieter, steadier, something that finally made sense. Justice doesn't scream. It only waits for the moment when silence tells the story better than words ever could. The days after the gala were a blur of noise and headlines. I didn't have to buy a paper or turn on the television. The world made sure I heard every word. There were articles online, news anchors repeating the story with their careful, dramatic tone. Prominent attorney caught in scandal after leaked video contradicts public statements. The words didn't even sound real. To me, they weren't a scandal. They were a confirmation. Andrew was suspended from his firm within 48 hours. The investigation into his ethics violations, the old filings, the false statements, came quickly after that. The same people who had shaken his hand on stage now refused to take his calls. The law world moves fast when one of its own becomes bad press. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even feel relief. I just kept living the same way I had for years. Tea in the morning, silence in the afternoon, the sound of the clock that still ticked but never moved. Then, one evening, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Lauren was standing there. She looked different from the polished woman I'd met in New York. Her makeup was gone, her hair pulled back loosely, her eyes red and tired. She was holding her gloves in her hands like she didn't know what to do with them. "Mrs. Thompson," she said softly, her voice shaking a little. "Please, can I come in?" I stepped aside. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Mrs. Caldwell had sat so many times before. For a while, she said nothing. I could see she was fighting tears. Finally, she whispered, "He's lost everything. His job, his reputation, everything he built is gone. He barely leaves the house. I know what he did was wrong, unforgivable even, but please, don't take Eli from him." Her words hung in the air. I took a slow breath before I answered. "I'm not taking anything," I said quietly. "I never wanted to take anything from anyone, but I won't let anyone take me apart again either. Not your husband, not the lies he told, not the silence he left me with." Lauren looked down at her hands. "He's not the man you think he is," she said. "He's broken. He knows he's done this to himself." I didn't reply. There was nothing to say that could change what had already been done. She stayed a few more minutes, apologized again, and left. I watched her walk down the steps into the snow, her shoulders hunched, her pace slow. The house felt even quieter after she was gone. A few days later, Andrew came himself. I saw him from the window before he reached the porch. He looked thinner, smaller somehow. The confident posture was gone. His coat was unbuttoned, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets. When I opened the door, he didn't smile. He just stood there for a moment as if he wasn't sure he should come in. "Can I talk to you?" he asked finally. I nodded and moved aside. He sat at the table, the same spot where I'd read his forged signature months ago. His hands were trembling slightly. He looked around the room like he didn't recognize it anymore. "I don't know where to start," he said. His voice was quiet, hoarse. "Everything's gone wrong." I didn't say anything. I just waited. It was the same patience I'd used when he was a boy, waiting for him to tell the truth after breaking something he shouldn't have touched. He looked at me, his eyes red. "I was stupid," he said. "I was scared all the time. Not of you, of losing everything. I thought money, status, reputation, those were what mattered. I was afraid of being ordinary, afraid of being poor again. I thought if I could control everything, I wouldn't have to feel small. I told myself that's what you would have wanted, for me to be successful no matter what it took. But that wasn't about you. That was about me." His voice broke. "I was afraid of being wrong, Mom. More afraid of that than I was of losing you." The words filled the room, heavy and slow. I had waited 10 years for him to speak like this. 10 years of silence, 10 years of wondering if I would ever hear the truth. Now it was here, and it hurt more than I expected. I wanted to reach for him, but I didn't. I kept my hands on the table, still my chest tight. I couldn't tell if I was angry or sad or both. "I waited 10 years, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. 10 years for the truth. But the truth has a cost, Andrew. It always does." He nodded slowly, tears sliding down his face. "I know." He stood after a moment, his chair scraping quietly against the floor. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just needed you to know that I see it now, all of it. I see what I became." He turned toward the door. I followed him with my eyes, but didn't move. He paused on the porch, snow still falling in thin sheets across the yard. For a moment, the streetlight caught his figure, long and uneven on the white ground. He didn't say goodbye. He just walked away, his shadow stretching farther behind him than his footsteps could carry. I stood there in the doorway, watching him disappear into the snow, the night air cold against my face. The son I'd raised was gone. The man he became had finally told the truth, but the truth came too late to fix what it broke. And as the snow kept falling, soft and endless, I whispered to myself, the truth always asks for something back. It was Mrs. Caldwell who suggested the agreement. She showed up again one morning, her coat still buttoned, a folder in her hand. The winter sun was pale through the window, and I could see the reflection of snow melting off her shoulders as she stepped inside. She didn't waste time with greetings. "I've drafted something," she said simply. We sat at the same kitchen table that had carried every difficult conversation of my life these past months. She laid the papers out carefully, straightened the corners, and pushed them toward me. "It's not revenge," she said, "it's structure. Families don't fix themselves with apologies. They need boundaries, rules, something to rebuild from." I put on my glasses and started reading. It was all there in her clean, steady handwriting and legal phrasing. The trust fund for Eli, in his name alone, managed until he turned 21, the condition that Andrew take full responsibility for his actions, the legal filings, the fraud, the lies. A line requiring family therapy for all of us, to be overseen by a counselor Mrs. Caldwell personally trusted. As I read, she said quietly, "This isn't about punishment. It's about giving everyone something to stand on that isn't made of guilt." The sound of the old clock filled the silence between us again. I thought about Eli, about his quiet courage, the way he had seen more truth than most adults around him. I thought about Lauren, the way she had come to my door begging me not to take her son. And I thought about Andrew, sitting at this very table, admitting what he had done. After a long time, I nodded. "This is fair." Mrs. Caldwell's eyes softened. "Then let's give them a chance to sign it." We met 2 days later in her study across the street. Her house always smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. The curtains were half open, letting in the gray afternoon light. The folder was already on the table, 3 pens lined up beside it. Lauren arrived first, holding Eli's hand. She looked tired but composed, as if she had decided to be strong for him. Andrew came a few minutes later. He didn't meet my eyes at first. He looked smaller somehow, like the air had been let out of him. Mrs. Caldwell stood between us like a referee who had seen too many battles. "This is not a courtroom," she said, her voice steady but kind. "This is a table. What you decide here will decide what kind of family you still have left." She handed the papers to Andrew and Lauren. They read in silence. I watched their faces shift as they reached the part about the therapy sessions, about accountability. Lauren's lips pressed together. Andrew's hand trembled slightly as he turned a page. When they finished, Lauren put the papers down and looked at me. Her eyes filled with tears. "We'll do it," she said quietly. "All of it. The therapy, the trust, everything. We'll do it." Andrew didn't speak right away. He looked at Lauren, then at me, and finally nodded. "It's the least we can do," he said. I leaned back, feeling a strange kind of calm settle over me. "No one gets erased from this family," I said. "Not me, not you, not Eli. The only people who disappear are the ones who choose to." Mrs. Caldwell passed the pens across the table. "Then sign," she said softly. The room went still except for the faint scratching of the pens. Lauren signed first, her hand steady even as tears slid down her cheeks. Andrew followed, his signature smaller, slower than I remembered. I signed last, the paper firm beneath my hand. When we were finished, Mrs. Caldwell gathered the pages and tapped them into a neat stack. "Done," she said simply. "Now the real work begins." Lauren reached across the table and touched my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving us a chance." I met her eyes. "Don't thank me. Just do better." Outside, the last of the snow was melting, the light turning soft and gold against the window. The house felt warmer somehow, as if something heavy had finally lifted, even if only a little. As I left, Mrs. Caldwell walked me to the door. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the wrongs. It just stops them from owning you." I looked back at the table, the signed papers still there, the 3 empty pens beside them, and I nodded. "Maybe that's enough," I said. And for the first time in years, it almost felt like it was. A year can change everything and almost nothing at the same time. Boston feels the same. The narrow streets, the gray winter light, the smell of the harbor when the wind shifts. But inside my life, things have rearranged themselves quietly, like furniture moved in the night. Andrew lives back in the city now. He found a small job as a legal assistant for a neighborhood firm. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. He rents a modest apartment not far from the park we used to visit when he was a boy. Sometimes I pass by and see him sitting on the bench there, reading a case file or just staring into space. We talk, but not every day. There are no big speeches between us anymore. Just the small, practical words people use when they're trying to rebuild something fragile. "How are you? Do you need anything? Dinner on Sunday?" He comes by once a week to see Eli, who now spends most of his time with me. After everything, Lauren thought it best for him to stay in Boston for school. I didn't argue. The house feels alive again with him here. His camera is always clicking. The walls, the windows, the light across the table in the morning. He says he's learning to see stories in ordinary things. Last month, he opened his first photo exhibition. He called it Light Between Walls. The name made me smile when I saw it printed on the flyer. It felt like he was talking about us, about the spaces between people and the light that somehow finds its way through. The gallery was small but full that evening. Family, friends, teachers, people from the neighborhood. I stood near the back, letting him have the moment. He was taller now, confident, but still humble, answering questions with a shy smile. Each photograph showed a quiet truth, a hand reaching for a doorknob, the reflection of a window on wet pavement, a woman reading alone on a bench. Small, ordinary moments, all soaked in light. Mrs. Caldwell came too, of course. She wore her favorite hat and a coat that looked far too heavy for the warm room. When she saw one of the photographs, a shot of the courthouse steps at sunset, she laughed softly. "Justice has a sense of style, apparently," she said. "Who knew it liked good lighting?" I laughed too, and she patted my arm. "He's a good boy," she said. "Maybe better than any lawyer I've met." When the speeches were over, people lined up for Eli to sign the exhibition catalog. I stood off to the side, watching him write his name over and over, his hand steady, his smile genuine. The light from the big windows caught his face, turning the edges of his hair gold. Someone played soft piano music in the background. Something slow, simple, beautiful. For a moment, it all felt still, like time had stopped again, but not in the same way as before. Not in grief or loss, but in peace. Andrew came up beside me then. He didn't say much. We stood together watching Eli's. There was pride in his eyes and maybe regret too, but it was quiet now, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken. When the last guest started to leave, Eli walked over and handed me one of his photographs, a picture of my kitchen window in the morning, light spilling across the table, my hands holding a cup of coffee. On the back, he'd written, "Thank you for giving me a home to see the light from." I looked at the photo for a long moment, then hugged him. "It was always your home too," I said. Mrs. Caldwell joined us at the door, her cane tapping softly against the floor. "You know," she said, smiling, "for all the trouble, this story turned out pretty well. Not perfect, but justice never is. It just needs people willing to live with its shape." As we stepped outside, the air was cool and clear. The lights from the gallery glowed behind us, reflecting off the glass windows. I turned back one last time and saw Eli still inside, laughing with a friend, the music fading behind him. Maybe that's the only real thing we ever get to own. Not the houses, not the money, not even the people we love. What we own is how we choose to end our stories. And standing there in the soft light, watching my grandson grow into the kind of person who could find beauty in everything, even the broken pieces, I realized mine was ending the way it should. Quietly, honestly, with light between the walls. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, tucked between a gas bill and a charity envelope. A plain white envelope with my name written in careful, uneven handwriting I hadn't seen in years. For a long time, I just stood by the window holding it, tracing the ink with my thumb. I didn't need to look at the return address. I already knew. I took it to the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea I never drank, and sat for a while before opening it. The paper inside was folded neatly, twice over, the way Andrew used to fold his homework when he was young, precise, deliberate, afraid to make a mistake even on paper. His handwriting had changed. It was smaller now, more uncertain, as if every word was being measured. "Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to live differently now. Quietly, honestly. I don't want to fix what can't be fixed. I just want to learn how to be decent again. I work at a small office now. I walk to work. I cook my own dinners. It's strange, but there's something peaceful in being ordinary. I see Eli on weekends. He talks about you all the time. He says you make the best pancakes in Boston. I guess that's all. Thank you for still being there, even when I wasn't. Andrew?" I read it twice, then a third time, slower. The words weren't polished or persuasive. They weren't the words of a lawyer trying to win something back. They were simple, bare, human. I looked around the kitchen, the chipped mug by the sink, the quiet hum of the heater, the soft ticking of the broken clock on the wall. Everything looked ordinary again, peaceful. I went to the living room and opened the small wooden box I kept on the shelf. Inside were pieces of my life that had survived the noise. The photo of Andrew as a boy, me holding him on the front steps of our old house. One of his school drawings, sun-faded but still bright. And now, this letter. I placed it gently beside the photo. Then I closed the lid and sat there for a long time, listening to the faint sound of the snow starting outside. Through the window, flakes fell slowly, drifting past the streetlight. The candle on the table burned low, its flame steady, golden against the dark. I thought about what the letter meant. Not an apology, not redemption, but something smaller and truer. It didn't erase the 10 years we lost. Nothing could. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe a single honest sentence could do something else. Maybe it could open a door that had been shut for too long. Not wide, not completely, but just enough for the light to come through. And as the snow kept falling, I whispered softly, "One letter can't erase 10 years. But sometimes it's enough to unlock what was never meant to stay closed." The sky that evening was painted in soft gold and fading pink, the kind of light that only happens for a few minutes before night takes over. I was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, a cup of tea cooling beside me. The air smelled faintly of pine and salt, Boston at its gentlest. Eli stood a few steps ahead, his camera raised, moving quietly the way he always did when he was behind the lens. He didn't rush. He never did. He waited for the right light, the way some people wait for forgiveness. Patient, steady, trusting it will come when it's meant to. The world was quiet except for the soft click of his camera and the distant hum of the city. For once, there were no reporters, no lawyers, no whispers about who was right or wrong. Just us. Two people, a porch, a sunset. I watched him focus, adjusting the lens, his face half lit by the fading light. He had grown so much this past year. There was calm in him, a quiet strength that hadn't come from winning anything, but from understanding. He had learned what his father and I had both taken too long to see, that truth doesn't destroy people. Hiding from it does. As he worked, I found myself thinking back to the woman I used to be, the one who woke up alone in a quiet apartment, who thought losing everything meant the end of her story. I thought I had been emptied out completely, that I'd spent my last bit of love on a child who no longer needed me. But I was wrong. Maybe loss doesn't hollow us out. Maybe it just makes room for something different, something simpler, something real. I looked at Eli through the golden air and said softly, "You've got the shot?" He smiled without lowering the camera. Almost, the light still changing. And I laughed, a sound that surprised me with how light it felt. The truth is, I never really lost everything. I lost illusions, the kind that make you believe love has to be perfect, or justice has to be loud, or forgiveness has to mean forgetting. What I found instead was quieter and harder, the courage to stand up straight, even when the world tilts, and say, "This is who I am. This is what's mine to keep." I once thought I had lost my son, my dignity, my time, but all along I was only learning how to take back what no one should ever be allowed to steal, my self-respect. Eli turned toward me then. "Okay, Grandma," he said, "one more." The light slipped through the porch railing, falling across my face. He lifted the camera, pressed the shutter, and the sound clicked through the quiet. One small, clean sound that somehow held a lifetime. I looked at him, smiling. "That one's for the ending," I said. He nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "The light's perfect now." The camera clicked again, the final frame. The piano music from inside drifted through the window, slow and soft, like a heartbeat. And as the light faded, the world turned to shadow, the last warmth of the day, resting on my skin.